Welcome to Technology and Security. TS is a podcast exploring the intersections of emerging technologies and national security. I'm your host, Dr. Miah Hammond-Errey. I'm the founding CEO of Strat Futures Proprietary Limited and an adjunct associate professor at Deakin University. My guest today is Ganna Pogrebna. Thanks for joining me, Ganna.
Thank you, Miah. Thanks for having me.
Ganna Pogrebna is a professor of behavioural data science, an author, speaker, and executive leader of major research teams. She's currently affiliated with Queen's University Belfast, the University of Sydney, and is a non-resident fellow at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, or ASPI. She also leads research on behavioural data science at the Alan Turing Institute. She was previously the executive director of the AI and Cyber Futures Institute, which won Australia's Cybersecurity Research Institution of the Year in 2025. She has secured over $30 million in competitive research funding and published over 100 peer-review publications. This includes recent books on bias, cyber risks, and AI ethics. She's won numerous high-profile individual awards and is on several editorial boards. We're coming to you today from the lands of the Gadigal people. I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge their continuing connection to land, sea, and community.
Yeah, me too. I want to say hello to all the First Nations people who are listening to us and acknowledge elders past and present.
I know inclusion in technology is really important to you. What do you think the most pressing issues for inclusion in the technology space are at the moment to call what you've referred to as a social uplift rather than driving inequality?
Yeah, I think we pretty much, I'm not going to say that we solved the problem with women in technology. I think it's still a big problem. But, talking generally about underrepresented groups, I think one of the most pressing problems is the divide between the urban and rural areas. A lot of data comes from rural regional areas and third world. As you know, the majority of trainers of machine learning models are in the global south, right? But people who kind of reap the benefits or enjoying the benefits of technologies are all in cities. And so, I think that's kind of a big problem.
Do you think there are any obvious things we can do to improve that?
Yes. I mean, my personal attitude towards this is kind of small step policy. So when I'm speaking at a conference, I just I have a rider. The rider is they have to include a person from either underprivileged background or, sufficient number of women. So I demand that. If they say, the usual thing that people say, oh, we can't find anybody. And I normally say, if you can't find anybody, I will find somebody that I know that can participate. So yeah, I think if every one of us have this kind of inclusion rider when we are joining a company, bringing in another female lead, maybe from a minority background, or another person from underrepresented group, someone from the LGBTQ community or something like that. Yeah, so that's that all helps. So yeah, that's what I do anyway.
It's a great suggestion. The Technology and Security podcast obviously explores the nexus between technology and security. And what do you think the most important insights that behavioural data science can offer this audience?
Yeah, I think that it's sort of, in the majority of cases when we talk about technology, it's mostly about, someone from engineering, just software engineering, designing something for people. And the lack of understanding of how people are kind of behaving in different scenarios really shows. So that's why sometimes we have really nice tools, but they're not adopted by the stakeholders. Yeah, so that's how behavioral science is contributing. Basically, it brings the understanding of behavior, and we can create, let's just say, machine learning models that incorporate decision theory or different types of things. Just to kind of give you an example, I'm sure everyone has a smartphone. So the original iPhone, if you don't know, they had basically a network wiring going around the edge of the phone. But when you're calling someone, you're doing this, right? So all of a sudden you wouldn't have network. And this is kind of an example how the engineering thought never kind of was thinking in terms of what people actually do. And this is how the behavioral component is contributing to the design of things. Similarly, if you're building a bridge, which I once was involved in a project where we built a bridge, if you just assume that people walk on the bridge, it will be really unstable if people run in different directions, right? So again, you need a behavioral scientist or behavioral data scientist to create a model of how this kind of random motion is going to work if that happens. Yeah. So yeah, like lots of applications is around the use and co-design with stakeholders.
I have a feeling we're going to come back to human and technology interactions throughout this discussion. What do you think the biggest issues for cybersecurity are in the next 2 to 5 years in an Australian?
Yeah, I think, well, one of them I kind of already a little bit touched on, which is the divide between rural and urban areas. Because in rural areas, I feel that people are particularly vulnerable because, well, as you know, there is there are problems with networks. People would basically go join a free Wi-Fi without quite understanding how insecure it could be. Another thing is, particularly this problem is very important in Australia, is the problem of QR codes, right? We can weaponize QR codes really easily, but in this country, we're particularly encouraged to scan QR codes everywhere. So that's kind of at the individual level. At a small business level, I think it's third-party risks. So I spend a lot of time with SMEs, and usually the founders tell me, oh, but we're using this tool or that tool. And you have often no idea how the model was trained, what are the potential risks of using that model. And you have no idea basically how secure it is. You have some due diligence that you are checking on, but if you're using off-the-shelf tools, it's really problematic.
And they're often considered the industry best practice tools. So you're often kind of forced into using those. Yeah,
that's it. And look, I get it, because you're, as a founder, so I was like in a situation where I had to build a team on a cheap, like it's on a very small budget. So I understand that you don't have the funds and you don't have necessarily time to train people to kind of understand all these risks. And, like you're kind of forced to adopt these different tools that are just out there. But there are now kind of legal requirements in Australia where we need to understand where the models are coming from, how they were trained. And also imagine that you are, say, an SME that does, for example, inclusion work, but you're using an algorithm that exploited people for training, right? So they used maybe some people in Africa to label the data sets. So that kind of, I'm not going to say that kind of kills the purpose of your enterprise, but it certainly creates some ethical issues in using these tools.
And they're really difficult ethical issues for individuals to solve. They're the kind of things that are systemic, and that if you're an individual founder and you're trying to use the best tools, as you say, you have limited resources, both look at, as you say, setting regulations or having clear guidelines and having, codes of conduct. It does make it a little bit easier, because as an individual, it's very hard to shape that system.
If we stop paying for technology that is not properly, developed, the situation will change and we will pay attention to what we're using. But until that happens, I think it doesn't matter what the government will put out in that domain.
You've spent some time traveling and working between Australia, Europe, and the US. What do you see as the most concerning or interesting technology and security trends?
I probably will start with generally the situation, maybe in how Australia is different here from US and UK. First of all, I think that I really admire kind of Australian founders, so people like you who kind of do things in Australia, because we sort of are a lot cheaper than people in UK and US. So like any investor, and I just want to say to investors and venture capitalists that on $1 you're getting so much more out of Australian workforce, founders or CTOs and all of these types of people. And it's because, normally we do not charge for our time. Like we charged for like assistance and other types of technology, but like, you're getting a lot more mileage out of the investment. But unfortunately, the Australian investors themselves are incredibly risk averse. So when we're looking at technology, we have lots of cool stuff being developed in Australia. Especially, I see that in quantum space, quantum algorithms. I don't mean quantum computing, but like quantum algorithms. So that's when we're using, for example, physics models in machine learning type of algorithms. So Australia is like one of the leading countries here, but most of the time, and I speak from the experience, I used to get an American investor or UK investor to commit to the project, and then we would get some Australian investors. So it's like a very risk-averse market. So like I think people kind of sort of deserve admiration. But in terms of kind of the general trends, I think definitely this year we saw a lot more work in agentic AI, and the development of autonomous agents in cybersecurity space. It's a very interesting area, very interesting how to deal with it, because obviously you can only work in very constrained environments with these types of things, but very promising. Yeah, like I said, quantum synergies, quantum modeling synergies with machine learning for cybersecurity. It's very interesting. Well, area where I worked in, I think it's probably my personal bias, is digital twinning. So yeah, like digital twins are definitely very hot.
Do you want to share a little bit for my audience about what digital twins are and some examples of how you've used them?
Yeah, sure. Most of the time when we say digital twins, people imagine just digital replica of an object or a person or something like that. So like, yeah, if you just have an exact replica of me, like a holographic, let's just say, replica of me here, that is not a digital twin. We call it digital shadow. And the reason is it's because like the data flows only in one direction. So like, we scan what Ganna looks like and make a digital representation of her. It becomes a digital twin when we actually model, right, what Ganna is going to do in different scenarios. So let's just say if we play the music, will she dance? So hopefully not. I don't think anyone wants to see that. But basically if we simulate what I will do in different scenarios, that would be a digital twin. Yeah, like we can basically create a twin of the entire cybersecurity system of the company, for example, and run different types of simulations, so simulated experiments, so that when we actually have to experiment, we can only run 1 or 2 experiments and not like 14, which significantly cuts costs of experimentation. We also can probably work out the recommendations, for example, for chief information security officers or, people in compliance departments of what decisions they could make. So basically it's a decision improving tools that help you simulate future scenarios that you don't necessarily have observations about. So it's very powerful. One of the first digital twins was designed for space, for Apollo 13 mission. So if the guys in the audience don't know what Apollo 13 is, that's basically a spaceship that at the takeoff kind of got the oxygen tank that exploded. And what happened was there were a bunch of people on the orbit basically stranded. And what NASA did, they ran lots of simulations in digital form and in physical term, and sort of they brought everybody safely home. So if you don't believe me, there is a nice movie about it that you can watch. But effectively, yeah, what this tool for CISOs does is, well, as you know, CISOs now under tremendous pressure. They have lots of variables coming in from live data and from kind of company preferences data, and they need to make lots of decisions, and they deal with a lot of different teams. And if we deconstruct the processes inside organizations, especially if we take the machine learning operations and how they translate throughout organizations, there are normally at least 4 types of stakeholders there, right? There is software engineering team, there is a data science team, there is cyber team, and there is an end users team. Let's just say you're bored. And you need to kind of navigate all this complexity and risk around all these teams and what they do in the business pipelines. So the tool essentially is helping not only to kind of understand what these processes are, but helps the CISO set priorities. So where is the most risky, vulnerable areas in the organization in terms of cybersecurity? And then it helps you prioritize your resources towards, particular types of risks. So that's kind of what that particular tool does. Yeah. So I also worked on some twins for nuclear decision making. If you want, I can talk about that too.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so it's completely different problem, but you also need simulation. So in cybersecurity domain, the complexity of the twin comes from the fact that we have lots of data, right? We have internal communications, we have reports from basically our cybersecurity system, so we know how many attacks we are trying to sort of, defend ourselves against, and we have the teams that we're trying to estimate the bias of. So we have lots and lots and lots of data. In nuclear domain, when we look at nuclear decision making as a humanity, we only had slightly over 20 closed calls in nuclear deterrence, where we almost had a nuclear disaster, and thank God, nothing happened. But if you think in terms of like nuclear decision making or Cuban crisis, I think is the thing that most people would know. But the problem in that domain is that we don't have enough data. Like we don't have enough data on how decision makers are kind of behaving in these situations. And what that twin does, it kind of allows current and people who were in the very recent past, nuclear decision makers in different countries, to simulate various scenarios, so actually build up the database of how people behave in nuclear deterrence situations. And this project was done with European Leadership Network. And if you Google it, you will find several white papers on this topic that we have written, and it kind of describes what the tool is. But effectively what it does, it also tries to decrease uncertainty. So it just gives you different scenarios of how people are making decisions without technology, how emerging technologies are potentially disrupting this domain, and how people are making decisions.
I'd like to go to a segment. What's a new cooperation, competition, or conflict you see coming in the next 12 months?
I think about it, it's definitely international. We sort of were in the weapons race. We are now in the race of weapons of mass influence, if you will, or AI weapons race, right? In terms of trying to kind of outdo China, but you can tell how much money is being invested, right? I think the U.S. president came out and announced 500 billion investment in this area, in the AI area. In the EU, it was 200 billion. I think in UK it's around 90 plus billion. At the moment, Australia is kind of really strange because I only heard about 1 billion. So it's not that much money compared to other countries. But I think we definitely feel that competition, and who wins is very important. And like the swings on the market are telling us that that's definitely on the agenda. Yeah, like I think that there is definitely the need for collaborating with companies like OpenAI, so large corporates that are actually developing LLMs, because we see a lot of changes in the market. For example, OpenAI is kind of stealing the traffic from other entities, like let's just say media, right? And we need definitely some collaboration. So you would have to basically sign some contracts to redirect the attention. And that affects obviously the cybersecurity domain as well, because a lot of people take to OpenAI these days to ask for advice on cybersecurity instead of going and reading something from a reputable website where people are, researching these types of things. So yeah, like these collaborative things would be like very important. And also it's important for sustainability of AI, because obviously LLMs have taken a lot of resources to develop, but we still don't have very good use cases for them to deliver return on investment. And so that's kind of the collaborative piece.
Mis and disinformation in our ecosystem is an existential challenge. How can behavioral data science help to counter it? And what are the kind of connections you're seeing between data science and this kind of new neurotechnology, the influence capacity of neurotechnologies?
Well, most of the time when we talk about mis or disinformation, it has nothing to do with technical sophistication, right? So a lot of attacks, successful attacks that you observe, like on the technological side, they're very, I'm not going to say primitive, but they're very simple, right? So the technology behind is very simple. What is sophisticated is the social engineering behind these things, because it's just kind of thinking about what people might do. And yeah, the problem really is that, so I, for example, design a lot of algorithms that kind of help us prevent attacks. But those algorithms are limited because they can only be trained on existing data, right? So if we have, let's just say, if Miah, you experienced some attacks on, I don't know, your website or your tool or something like that. So if we have observations of that, we can train a model that will help us prevent the attack. But if it's a completely new type of attack, which normally is a combination of different types of threats in one kind of big ball of sort of distraction that someone designed, then it's very difficult to detect. Then you need humans. Research found that, all my research and research from kind of several other people that are doing human factors work in cybersecurity finds that people on average are about 30% more efficient than algorithms when we talk about completely new risks. And so kind of disinformation definitely is one of the things that you can only tackle with kind of human involvement, because it's kind of one of those things that are difficult to predict without having data. And the good thing about it is that we do have research on what is called human as a cybersecurity sensor. It's not my research. It's research by a guy called George Lucas, based in University of Greenwich in the UK. And basically the idea of this human as a cybersecurity sensor is that his team analyzed multiple attacks that are deployed on humans, and they figured out there are 21 varieties or types of these attacks. And they designed a test. And they released this test on social media. I think it was Twitter originally. I think they do it pretty regularly. But the point is that when you give this test to people, and the test works like this, you have a screen with certain types of information. It could be mimicking a phishing email or, different types of attacks. And you look at the screen and the question is, do you think this could be a start of an attack? So is it an attack or not? And in that context, about on average, 70% of people get it right all the time. And it's basically just putting people into the mindset that it may or may not be an attack, right? And what happens next. But the cool thing about this test is that they figured out through this research that there are people who always get it right, like 100% of the time. And obviously, the task for behavioral science now is to figure out what is it about those people, right? How are they different from the rest of the population? So can we train everybody to, see these attacks, or should we have like special departments in each company where, there is a like human cybersecurity sensor sitting there and they just receive these different tips. So this may be an attack and they can do this recognition.
You've had a really varied and international career. Do you have any reflections on how to bridge what is often seen as a gap between research and then adoption, especially by government agencies or security and emergency services?
Right. Look, I think definitely evidence-based policy is a big problem because a lot of policy decisions, in my experience, they're just made based on intuition rather than data. Well, I've never seen, like a politician come out and say, oh, we have all this data and that's why we decided to do this. And most of the time, even when we have data in political domain, is we're asking the general public, not the people who are maybe directly affected by certain types of policies. Well, generally, I think that the disconnect is, I understand the disconnect because, I myself am like a plain coach, right? I kind of write these models, but I'm interested in practice. And so I devote kind of significant amount of my time to develop tools for industry. But very few academics do that. Like a lot of academics are interested in providing vision or providing some, talking about trends or thinking about theory, but they're not like developing stuff. And I can't blame them because, it's not really like academic work. Like you need to be sufficiently interested in the real world to do that. I'm an economist by training, but I got a job in engineering department where people sort of, wanted to do real stuff in the real world. And that's how kind of my research became really kind of applied. But it's not for everybody. And I think the disconnect happens because if you go to a consultancy company, they give you a finished product, right? They kind of develop things for you and they deliver a solution. But in the context of academic work, it's mostly just advice. And it's kind of like I understand industry why they and policymakers why they can't fully engage with academia, and equally academics who are not sufficiently motivated to go into that direction. So I think that it's just a problem. It's just a problem of KPIs and priorities in both. Another thing I wanted to quickly mention is the time frame, because if you are developing real world solutions, normally you need to act fast. You have maybe 3 to 6 months to develop a product. Research doesn't work like that. We have maybe 2 years before we publish a good paper. So it's different time scale. Very few academics are good with like quick thoughts.
I want to go to a segment called Emerging Tech for Emerging Leaders. What do you see as the biggest shifts for leadership from the introduction of new technologies?
I keep saying this, but I think that it's the main challenge is that you have to realize, and I kind of, as an executive, I realized that a little bit too late, I think. You are not leading human teams anymore. You are leading human-machine teams. So every person that you're leading is a combination of human and machine at the moment. People have different strengths against machines, right? So someone is really great on creativity, someone is great at kind of transferable skills, someone is great at prompt engineering and all of that kind of stuff. So you would have different strengths in your team regarding of how they collaborate with this machine component. But you have to realize that it's not just humans and it's not just algorithms. So it's a combination. And I think the complexity is to understand where there is kind of human bias potentially kind of leading into this problem and where there is kind of machine bias, and you need to kind of see it and offset it with your vision. So it's sort of that kind of a combination of complexity that I think the current leadership is facing.
Yeah, that's a huge and very interesting shift. Let's jump to bias, because you recently published a book called The Big Bad Bias Book. Can you give us a bit of an overview?
Yeah, actually, that's a good story probably for this podcast because it came out of cybersecurity work. So I have this colleague, her name is Karen Renaud. She's a very, very famous professor in the UK. Her work is mostly on cybersecurity and how people are navigating the field, especially with passwords, like how people are setting up passwords. Like she's also interested in how do you provide secure systems for elderly, So she's this kind of amazing person that works on human factors in cyber. And we've been talking together for a while, and we kind of decided that the cool topic, really very important topic in cybersecurity, is understanding human bias and how it kind of comes into different systems. And we decided that like when people are trying to find out about bias, or just try Googling bias, right? You will find lots of sources and there's just so much information staring at you. It's very difficult to make sense of it. And we decided that, okay, we need to do some systematic way of understanding bias. And there was cognitive, I think it's called cognitive codex or something, but it was completely incomprehensible. It was this big round sort of graph with lots of biases randomly allocated. And we decided, okay, we're going to do a table. First, we just released a table, had lots of discussions with the peers, was like, let people criticize the tool. And the idea was that we will write sort of the book. The book is a little bit like a reference book. Basically, what it has a name of the bias. Let's just say illusion of control. This is a very kind of famous thing that most of us do. Like we all have illusion of control. This is basically when we think we control something when in fact there is no way to control it. And, you would have the description of the bias. You would have a really sort of real world application story between two characters that we have developed. And then you also have the robustness part, how robust this effect is. And you have two types of examples, like trivia example and business example, and some references for people who want to learn more, like beyond what we've written in the book. Through this kind of work, we wrote about 202 human biases. So that kind of covers the entire table. Yeah, so that's basically, it was like many years of work and work with Illustrator.
I want to go to a segment called Interdependencies and Vulnerabilities. What areas of interdependency or vulnerability in technology and security do you think are critical in the coming few years?
I already mentioned this third-party risk. Well, that's definitely a big one. Another one would be the supply chains for cybersecurity. So I have a student who is hopefully going to graduate early next year. He just submitted his dissertation looking into a critical software problem. And it's a big problem because we have not only, criticality in our supply chains in terms of like where parts are coming from, but also in software. So we sometimes rely on software that is developed in countries that can kind of listen in to what you're doing. And so, I think that's a major dependency that we need to solve. And, we kind of see that in the context of Ukraine a lot, right? So they've been relying on, let's just say, Chinese technology a lot. And we know that China now supplies both like the Russian side of the conflict and the Ukrainian side of the conflict. It's very difficult to rely on, software and technology from, let's just say, that particular supplier.
Are there any interdependencies and vulnerabilities between technology and security that you wish were better understood?
And let me just say this, that again, from the human factors perspective, we on many occasions are developing tools for cybersecurity that are backward engineered to stakeholders. Like, for example, we would have some sort of cybersecurity tool that is deployed in a company, but we're not thinking at all how people work and or how customers interact with the company. And so I think that we need to better understand how to co-design. Attitude is like, if you are talking about adoption, you already lost the plot. You need to be talking about co-design. How do we co-design for better security with people who are going to be using the tools? And then deploy the tools once we will develop them for those users, for those stakeholders. And I don't think we do any work. Like, I can count people probably with the palm of like one hand, like who do relevant work in that area. Normally we're like, we have the tool, let's figure out what segment we're going to push it.
Do we then, as humans, team better with machines?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on the demographic characteristics, like on your risk profile, right, in terms of like who you are. um, to have a better understanding of that, because for some people it comes quite naturally, right? So we sort of are pretty aware of what we're doing in, like, let's just say online generally, but we have, say, vulnerable people, like, again, like the elderly, like, segment. It's very difficult to devise like the right products for this segment, because they just don't have a lot of experience, or they more likely to fall into the trap of a good social engineer and all that kind of stuff. So I think the first thing to do is like really try tools, not and try to understand how they work, at least the basics. Like, for example, with LLMs, lots of people think that it's some sort of like live communication, but in fact it's a pre-specified model, pre-trained model. Yeah, it's trained on lots and lots of data, but it's not learning anything from you, and it's also not it doesn't understand what it says, right? It says something that mimics human communication, but in fact, the LLM model, like ChatGPT, for example, it doesn't understand what it says to you, and you need to be aware of that. So if we give it like a logical model, a logical problem, it probably will not be able to solve it correctly, because it just doesn't understand how human logic works. And another thing is like, you need to realize that machines and people think differently. So as long as you are aware of that, I think you will do much better than the average user or developer.
Let's go to a segment. What alliances do you think will be most in cybersecurity, AI, and emerging tech in the next few years?
Yeah, I think definitely. So cybersecurity generally is not an issue that could be solved by any sector or segment alone. The corporate understanding and the policymaking understanding needs to come together, really, because companies hold data and the government has the expertise, to understand it. And so I think that's kind of what we need to be thinking about, like how do we collaborate together, especially in terms of information sharing, because the problem is that adversaries are extremely good at information sharing. I always give this example, but there is a hotel in Austria that was hacked 4 times in exactly the same way. So it was a ransomware attack. And the ransomware attack is, you have these electronic keys that you use to enter the rooms. And basically the adversaries just locked the system. And the hotel paid the ransom 4 times. And very often people say, like, it's stupid. But I'm saying, no, it's not stupid if you're a hotel owner, because people want to get into the rooms. And so, you're trying to quickly solve the problem. So after these 4 attacks, they got physical keys back in. So now they sort of are not using electronic system at all. People are just running around with physical key. But you sort of see the adversaries are sharing information, right? Someone hacked into the system and they shared the information on the dark web, and others have instigated exactly the same attack on the same hotel. But when we're trying to share information on cybersecurity domain in kind of from the benign side, everyone is sitting on the data. That's what first thing. Second thing, even when attack is in progress, let's just say on Commonwealth Bank is not going to call ANZ and say, guys, you know what? We're being attacked, so you're probably next, right? Because it's like there are corporate issues, like legal issues with that, right? You can't tell a competitor things like this. And so until we figure out how to do this information sharing better on the good side, where the good guys are, it's going to be very difficult.
As you know, my company Strat Futures has developed a platform to support leaders who make high-stakes decisions to improve their cognitive readiness and resilience. I know you've worked with so many different sectors, including lots of movie companies. Do you have some good examples of positive change we've seen companies work for their users or customers?
The best results I saw, like in cybersecurity, were coming from not so much from the data analysis, but from sort of behavioral understanding of why things are happening. and working with KPIs. So probably the best thing I saw recently was an insurance company in the US where they decided that they're going to have like this monthly competition in reporting cybersecurity threats. So they basically have this list that the CEO is publishing every month, and every department is trying to be like in the first three, or at least not at the bottom of the list, and so the managers are incentivizing their staff in whatever means possible to kind of report potential threats. And they really created a positive culture because they celebrate, people who are reporting stuff and reporting actual threats that could hurt the organization. Yeah, so
that is such a good reminder to come back to KPIs and business incentives, because it actually drives change.
Yeah.
Coming up is Eyes and Ears. What have you been reading, listening to, or watching lately that might be of interest to my audience?
This area is just moving so quickly that it does help to kind of to listen to your podcast, and I tend to maybe sort of just read classical literature more or less. It's not about I think the new trends you can definitely get from that, sort of the philosophy of how things work with human psychology is like, you just read some basically classics.
Let's go to a segment called Disconnect. How do you wind down?
Well, I don't. I think that what really helps is nature, especially in Australia, like just going somewhere. So I was, for example, in North Territory recently where there is nothing, like you don't have internet, you don't have anything. Kind of, you can just see the Milky Way at night and all of this. It's amazing. Like, we're very lucky to live in like one of the most beautiful places on earth. So definitely that. But the reality often is, especially when you are an SME, work in SME context, or you are working in government context, you don't have an opportunity to switch off. Like most people I know, they work 24/7. And so, I would just advise maybe to go for a walk, switch everything off, just have some time off gadgets.
My final segment is called Need to Know. Is there anything I didn't ask that would have been great to cover?
So the main thing is just to engage and to try and not be afraid of trying and not be afraid of making mistakes, because we all make mistakes and that's okay. You're never going to be 100% ready for all the technology that surrounds you, but trying certainly helps you understanding the limitations of what you're using or what you're trying to engage with. And I just think that that's probably the most important thing that you can do to your life. Just try.
Yeah, thank you so much. Ganna, thank you for joining me so much. It's really been a pleasure.
Likewise, thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to Technology and Security. I've been your host, Dr. Miah Hammond-Errey. This podcast is brought to you by Strat Futures. If there was a moment you enjoyed today or a question you have about the show, send an email to the address in the show notes. Please rate, review, and subscribe to help promote technology and security.